Welcome to the second video for my Creative Scotland Open Fund project to create a producer's portfolio. I'd like to thank Creative Scotland for supporting this project, and following some major troubleshooting issues that I covered in my last blog, Creative Scotland have agreed to push back the start date to the 1st of March. So that's great. It gives me time to create some more videos which will serve as part of my introduction. And in this one, I'll be talking about studio hardware essentials. So that is outboard gear, mixing desks, patch bays, insert effects, auxiliary effects, MIDI controllers, studio monitors, screens, and a few other things. So there's a lot to go through, and I'll be assuming a basic to mid-level understanding of technical aspects of audio and jargon, because if I make this too basic, this video will go on forever. But I will be leaving key points on the screen for beginners if they want to do any more of their own research. And if there's anything in particular you want broken down, if you have any questions, if you're troubleshooting, or even if you disagree with anything I've got to say today, please do leave a comment below. I'll be very happy to answer anything I can and get my audio geek on to the max in some healthy constructive chat if you're up for that. So without any further ado, let's take a look at my setup. Starting on the right here, you can see my studio monitors. These are Mackie HR824s. They're not the best in the world, they're not the worst in the world. I've had them for a very long time. Something beginners should know about studio monitors: as long as you're getting something semi-decent, after you've had some experience with them, your ears will get tuned to how to mix with them better and better, because you'll figure out how what you're doing on your own speakers will relate to other systems as a whole. But that only comes with time and practice. You can also see I have 3 screens there. They're not switched on in this photograph, but the central screen is used for the main DAW. That's where I've got my projects open. The top screen, I tend to put my virtual mixer up there. And the screen on the right is the place where I put the plugins that I'm using all the time in the project. And coming back to the desk in the middle, on the top shelf I have an Arturia MIDI controller. That is a Keylab 49 Mark II. Just under that, above my keyboard and the mouse, there's a little shelf that pulls out. That's got a Korg Electribe ER1 on it. That's a retro drum machine. I love it very much. On the right of that is a Fader Fox PC44 MIDI controller. That's just a 64 dial controller because I love automation, so I can assign these dials to parameters in my effect plugins and adjust them by hand in real time. If you don't know about automation, look it up. It's a fantastic thing to get into, so much fun. And just under that shelf that my keyboard and mouse is on, there's another one that pulls out, a Native Instruments Complete Control S25 MIDI controller. That came bundled together with some pretty good plugins, I've got to say, from Native Instruments. Even though they're not necessarily the best at customer support and service, they make some fantastic synths. I think Massive is my favourite one. It's not demanding on the CPU and it's so versatile. It's definitely got its own sound, but there's so much you can do. It's phenomenal. Moving on to the left of the photo, we have my mixer desk and my rack mount. So I'm going to break these down in quite a lot of detail. Let's start with my mixing desk. This is an Allen & Heath GL3. I'm told it was a beta desk, so this was before they put their official line out. As far as I understand, all the components in this were hand fitted. It is, technically speaking, a live mixing desk. I picked it up at a real bargain on eBay because it wasn't in the best condition, but I took it to Glasgow Studio Electronics, and Ian over there did an absolutely fantastic job of cleaning it up, and he also put direct outs into each of the 32 channels, which is an essential for home recording. I'm very used to working with direct outs. I've got a lot of things to plug in. So any of you that are into audio and have talked to friends who maybe don't know anything about it, they'll look at a picture of a mixing desk like this and they'll say, how on earth do you know what to do with all these buttons and dials? But we know that it's not as complicated as it looks. On a 32 channel mixing desk like this, you have 32 channel strips. That's the same vertical row of things repeated 32 times, just one for each of the inputs on the desk. And I'm going to go through the functions on this particular desk that each channel strip has in just a moment. What you can't see around the back of the desk is that each channel has a line input, a microphone or XLR input, an insert for your insert effects such as compressors and preamps, and as I said, I got a direct output onto every channel. Let's come round to the central panel of the desk before we go into the channel strips. I'm not going to cover absolutely everything in the central panel because there's a bit too much to go over. But let's start at the top right of the central panel. There's a place to plug in a light. I've not got one plugged in. Immediately to the left of that, you can see there's a gooseneck microphone plugged in. And immediately below that, you've got your talkback level. So this is for talking to people who are in the middle of recording with headphones on. I can hold down the talkback button and speak to them through their headphones. And again, one step below that, they're not lit in the photograph, but I've got my master LED levels, so they show me the master output levels of the entire desk. Still working our way down, we've got the headphones level. I'm going to skip down to the bottom. You've got these two black faders. Those two black faders relate to the LEDs that I mentioned because those control the level of the master outputs. To the left of those, we've got 4 red faders, and those relate to my master bus levels, which I'll cover later on. If you look up from there to the 4 yellow faders and the 4 yellow dials, those control the input and output levels of my auxiliary effects. So that's all I want to say about the central panel. As I mentioned earlier, if you want any of this broken down or you want to talk about more of the functions that are on the central panel, I'm sure we can both learn something because there's a couple of buttons on here that, to be honest, I don't know what they do yet. I've never needed to figure it out so far. So now let's take a look at a channel strip. At the very top there's a red button, that's for your phantom power. So phantom power, for those who don't know, some microphones, such as studio condenser microphones, need to be powered, and the mixing desk can send power through an XLR cable to that microphone. All you need to do is activate it. Studio condenser microphones are far more sensitive to sound than the ones you'd see people use on stage, but that's a whole different, very interesting topic in and of itself. I won't go into that today. One step down from the phantom power button, you've got an invert phase button. Again, I'm not going to cover that today. If you want to look up phase and inverting phase, you can do that. Then we have the mic line toggle button, and that simply toggles between what input the channel is accepting audio from. Is it the microphone input or is it the line input? Sometimes on this desk I do find that setting it to a mic input when I've got a line instrument plugged into the channel does give a warmer sound. The first dial, this red one, is your input gain. If you've never looked into it, I'd highly suggest having a look at gain staging. It's so important. At every level of recording audio, your gain, input and output levels need to be set at the right level. So for example, I've got my input gain that I'm just talking about. At the bottom of the channel, this white fader is my output level. That output level goes through my direct out into the input of my Mo2 interface that I'll talk about soon. My Mo2 has an output level, my DAW has an input level. You know, these are all gain and volume stages that if they're too high or too low, it can cause issues. Too low can lead to too much background noise. Too high can lead to distorted signals. I'm not going to go into any more detail than that for now. As I said, look up gain staging yourself if you want to know more, or leave me a question. Immediately below the gain dial, we have a high pass filter button. That just cuts off the absolute low end frequencies. I don't tend to use it because I can always do it afterwards in my DAW. These buttons, I'm guessing, are usually set to about 60 to 80 Hz in the frequency range. Then moving down, we're looking at 4 blue dials and 2 green dials. These are my EQ dials. So this is a 4-band EQ. My high level, I think it's set to about 12k. And my low dial must be about 100. The 2 sets of green and blue in the middle. The blue dials will set the amount of gain on the high, mid and low mid frequencies, and the green dials will sweep those frequencies. You can choose what frequency you want to boost or cut. And then the white button just below them will turn the EQ settings on or off for that channel. Something I've got to say, and this took me 10 years to figure out, is that not all mixing desks are the same. This might seem obvious, but when I moved from an old Mackie desk that I had before this to this Allen and Heath desk, I could not believe the difference in the quality of the EQ. It's just night and day. Anything I EQ'd on the Mackie just sounded bad, and I thought it was something I was doing wrong. But when I got this desk and started playing with the EQ, I was like, oh my god, all these years I didn't realise what a difference the quality of the build of the EQ components makes to the sound. That's a really big thing. If you've had the same mixer for a long time and it's a cheap mixer and you've got a little bit of money set aside to invest in your home recording, look at your mixing desk if you haven't done so. The one last thing I'd like to say about EQ is that most people only concentrate on additive EQ. That's when you boost a frequency, but there is so much to be said for subtractive EQ. So if you've been overlooking that, definitely have a read about additive and subtractive EQ, or even better, have a play with it. The 4 grey dials under the EQ control the amount of signal that are sent to my first 4 buses. Because this is a live desk, these grey dials traditionally are supposed to be used for controlling volumes to individual monitors. So for example, let's say I had the vocals coming through this channel and the vocalist was using monitor 1, I turn that way up for the vocalist. But the drummer, who might be on channel 2, doesn't want as many vocals in their monitor, so I don't turn it up quite as much, and so on. There's a little button under the 4 grey dials that controls whether the signal is sent to the monitors post or pre-EQ. The yellow dials below that relate to the yellow dials and faders in the central panel. These control how much signal from the channel is sent to the auxiliary effects. I'll talk more about auxiliary effects very soon. Right underneath those 4 yellow dials, there's another button that controls whether that's sent post or pre-EQ. We've got 1 brown dial that controls the panning of the channel, whether it's coming through the left speaker or the right speaker or in the middle. A red button to mute or unmute the channel. We've got 3 LEDs, a red one, a yellow one and a green one, that give me an indication of the output level of the channel. PFL button, if I activate that, the master LEDs in the central panel will only show me the input level of that channel. They won't change the sound, they'll just give me a clearer indication of the signal. The small white button under that controls whether or not the audio is getting sent to the master outputs or not. Then there's 2 grey buttons, I won't go into those. And finally, the fader for each channel that I already mentioned, that controls the master output levels of that channel. So I hope you're bearing with me. I'm now going to talk about all the funky things that are on my rack mount. Starting at the top, I have a 16-channel ProLeads combo input patch bay. So a combo input can take either an XLR or a 1/4-inch jack connector. The way I have this set up is that the first 8 inputs of the patch bay are linked directly to the first 8 inputs of my mixing desk. Inputs 9 to 16 are linked directly into my audio interface. I don't use those very much, but when I do, it's because I've got quite a lot of microphones set up on my drum kit, and I just send my tom-toms directly to my sound card input and do my processing post-recording on those. One patch bay down is a Studio Spares patch bay, which ties directly into the combo patch bay above it, because you can see I've put numbers across this. Those numbers are the channel on the mixing desk. So each direct out from the mixing desk channels 9 to 32 is linked into the back of this patch bay, and I can quickly send them to channels 1 to 8 for recording into my audio interface. This is just a matter of convenience. It really speeds things up because it means I don't need to get in behind my mixing desk to change my inputs. I just send whatever channels I want to my audio interface using patch bay routing. The third patch bay is a P&R PB48. As you can see, I've only got a few things marked up on that. I use that for patching in my outboard auxiliary effects and compressor, and I can also send the entire mix of the mixing desk out on 2 channels. The next thing we have is my headphone amp, which is an ART Head Amp 6. That duplicates the headphone output from my mixing desk 6 times, so I can have 6 people listening into the mix as well as myself, because my mixing desk has 2 headphone outputs. Then we are looking at my audio interface, which is a Mo2 24IO. It's a very simple audio interface, but very good. I'd say it's an entry-level professional audio interface. It's got 24 line inputs and 24 line outputs on the back, and it also gives me an LED display on the front that shows me what my levels look like visually. And again, as is the case with mixing desks, when it comes to audio interfaces, I could not believe the enormous difference it made to the audio quality when I upgraded from my last one, which was an M Audio Delta 1010, to this Mo2 24IO. The audio just shined so much more clarity, so much more warmth. And as far as I understand, that's mainly to do with the quality of the analog to digital and digital to analog converters. When you're recording audio into a computer system, the source audio, as you know, is analog, but the computers record everything as digital information, so that needs to get converted. The quality of the components and the construction has an enormous effect on the quality of the audio that's captured inside your computer system. This big gold thing here is an SPL Channel 1 preamp. I bought it over 20 years ago when I got a student loan to do a music course in London, and I splashed out on this baby. It does have microphone and instrument inputs. I've only been using it for recording vocals, so that would be the microphone input. The quality of the build and the sheen that I can give to your vocals are just absolutely incredible. Even after I bought it, it mostly lay dormant for 5 to maybe even 10 years. I don't know why I neglected it. I think I was maybe afraid of committing to altering the audio before it got into my computer system. But actually, it's such a beautiful piece of equipment. It makes all the difference to take the time to learn how to use preamps properly. This particular one, well, it's got S reduction, compressor limiter, EQ on it, as well as an overdrive function that you can use to warm up your audio. The next thing on my rack is a Rain DC24 compressor. It's a 2-channel compressor, and the reason why I got this one is because I was reading up on the subject, and this was coming up in quite a lot of blogs about one of the classic sounding compressors. I picked one up secondhand online. The next device, this is a TC Electronic M350 effect processor. So this is reverbs and delays for the most part. It does have some modulation. The reason why I originally got this is because I had a singer in recording who wanted to hear reverb while recording was in progress, and at the time I didn't have a way to do that. I did have some TC Electronic effects in my computer at the time, and I did like the quality of their reverbs and delays, so I ended up buying a TC Electronic auxiliary effects unit, which is plugged into the auxiliary section on my mixing desk that I covered earlier. Second from the bottom, we've got an ART Multiverb LTX. This is a very old auxiliary effects unit. It's not the greatest quality, it's quite noisy. The one reason why I got this is because I love the flangers that are in this. I don't use the flangers while I'm recording, but what I might do is send something back out from my computer into the desk through the flanger effect and record that back into the computer again. The very last unit on here is a Motu MIDI Express 128. So this gives me 8 MIDI 5-pin DIN inputs and outputs. I used to have a lot more external MIDI devices that ran on a 5-pin DIN lead, but as time goes on, more devices have a USB connection instead. So that's something you can look up if you're interested. I think 5-pin DIN is definitely on the way out. Also, your virtual instruments that I will cover in a later video are gradually replacing external electronic devices, especially as recording systems become more powerful. So well done if you've got to the end of this video. As I said, I'm happy to discuss any of the points I've brought up in finer detail. Just leave me a comment below. In my next video, I'm going to go back to screen recorders and really go over in fine detail all the technical issues that I had with that. So I'm going to cover how I set up my audio inputs and outputs, and how I set up my video codecs. So if you're into screen recording or you want to get into screen recording, definitely have a look out for that, because it's going to cover a lot of things that are definitely going to help you on your way if you're just beginning with those. So I'll see you in video number 3.